I guess we'll call this meeting to order. And I'm just putting this out there. My goal is to have this be our fastest meeting of all of the ones we've had, right? So tonight we're going to dig into some math. So raise your hand if you like math and epidemiology. Yeah? Yeah, so this is going to be some mental gymnastics. We have put together a report card that I will share for all of your input, but this is going to be heavy on the math. So Matthew, this should count for something for you for school, because this is like my biostats that I did at Harvard. This is that level. So you're gonna enjoy this. Not really, but I'm trying to make this fun, you guys. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Yep. Yeah, great. Okay, so you might be wondering what this is. This is a rough draft, but I think it's a good draft of a potential report card. And I will give you some background. I will also let Sarah chime in. So she is also the brains behind this system that she has kindly shared, on our committee calls, how the hospital has created a report card with numbers and stages. This is what we're proposing. So I will kind of start with, let me jump to, again, so this is the CDC guidelines, and this is what we based the report card off of. So this is the new CDC guidelines for handling COVID in schools. So green is lowest risk, red is high, so we're gonna kind of follow that same color scheme. And then there's a number of indicators on their kind of algorithm on their report card here. And we took a shot at making a report card modeled after the CDC guidelines, but then it would use our local data. So I think it should be informed by what's happening locally to know, and if you look at other schools, as well as the Iowa County, Iowa County Public Health Department's report card or dashboard, it's all based on our local numbers. So you might be familiar with this. This is the Iowa County dashboard and the metrics or the numbers. And so you'll see here, I've notated, so our number 1 metric comes from this number, number 2, number 3, number 4, and number 5. But let me get into kind of the math or how we go about this. And Sarah, please feel free to stop me or, chime in. So our 5 metrics that we would recommend the school consider for the report card is new cases per day, averaged over 14 days. That number comes right off of the Iowa County dashboard. Percent positive, so that's the percent positive number of tests done, again, directly off the Iowa County dashboard. Testing capacity, so that means how many tests can be done. Number 4 is rising, falling cases. So that means the current week compared to the prior week. So are we increasing the number of positives, or are we decreasing, or are we steady? And then community spread, and that's the metric, that percentage number, and everything then has the numbers here. So you might be wondering what this -1, 0, and 1 mean. So when you start the scorecard, you start with a score of 5. So you can either add 5 points, subtract 5 points, or stay steady. So each line, you would either subtract 1, add 0, or add 1. And the total score then could be 0 to 10. And then the thresholds would be virtual, would be red, a score of 0 to 2. The current hybrid plan would be a score of 3 to 6. Phase 2, which is what we will also discuss potentially tonight, is a score of 7 to 8. And then 100% in person, when we can get there, will be 9 to 10. So are there any questions before we go into what our current numbers look like, or any thoughts or feedback on this?
I do. I worry about opening up to a plan where we are bouncing between a current hybrid and a phase 2 and back and forth again, because it sounds like really simple here, but in reality, it's not simple.
Right. Yeah, so you're saying get rid of,
like combine those into one hybrid. And if it's a new one, I get that. Or maybe once we move into phase 2, that becomes our new normal hybrid. I'm okay with that idea as well.
mm-hmm.
And Jane, I will say that so right below the like score and the virtual and things like that, so it says need score in the higher level for 2 weeks before a pivot at the quarter. So we can kind of define when that pivot would happen. But this would just be kind of defining what the levels would be, if that makes sense. So we did talk about whether it's just 3 phases or whether there's, that 4th phase in there. Is it just all virtual, current hybrid, or 100% in person? And I think there probably is something, so 100% in person is pretty, the amount of sacrifice we would have to make to our social distancing and things like that, I think our numbers would have to be pretty amazing before we'd be able to get there. So I do feel like there's probably something in between there where we could expand without having significant sacrifice to those things, where there's that kind of in between normal, just what we would normally do in a usual year, and what we're doing right now. So that's kind of why we have that 3rd level in there. And it definitely is like, I don't know how this is going to look when you actually do the pivoting. Like I really don't. It's hard for me to picture how we make the declaration and then when that pivot happens. But I think at this point, a pivot at the quarter would be a reasonable thing to think about. We're certainly not anywhere near a pivot at this coming quarter with the numbers where they are. So it wouldn't be anything anytime soon. It really would be perhaps at the next quarter that we'd be ready for it.
Okay.
So I can kind of walk you through the numbers and what they've looked like.
Anika?
Oh, yeah.
Can I realize this is all really a format and all, but this is going to be parent facing, correct?
No.
No? Okay. Because I was going to say need score in higher level for 2 weeks before a pivot at a quarter. I had to read that 4 times before I figured that out.
Yeah.
So
this is basically like our working report card. I can show you what it could look like.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I mean, if this is not going to be parent facing, that's okay.
Right. So we would simplify it greatly for parents or public facing, and basically be just a color and a number. So, a number meaning, so for this week, our score is at a 3, and that puts us in the current hybrid. But we don't need, this is like epidemiology, public health,
Got it. All right. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anika, would it make sense or be valuable to walk through why you guys chose 1 through 5?
1 through, sure. Sarah, do you want
to? Yeah, so, we looked at, so the CDC Safe Schools Reopening has a lot of these things included. So we didn't just come up with these kind of out of the air. We really looked at what is the school dashboard looking at and what is the CDC indicators looking at. So in common between the two of them is the new cases. Can you flip back to the CDC one? Because I know that one a little less readily. So new cases, percent positive, and then the secondary indicators down below are the percent change, so a trend line essentially of cases to know whether you're rising or decreasing. And then we added, so we didn't put any of the hospital things on there because we really felt like it wasn't necessarily terribly relevant for the schools, for what our hospital is in terms of percentages and things like that. if our hospital is to that greater than 90% and all of that and lots of COVID patients, then necessarily our numbers are bad enough that it's already being reflected in our score. So adding that in, I think, just kind of confused the picture. It also has a lot of flux to it. So, you know, we could have every bed occupied tonight and tomorrow half the people go home. And so when do you measure it? Where's the snapshot that you take in time and things like that? So then, let's see, what's the other thing that I feel like I have for
Community spread.
Oh, the community spread. So that is something that's on the school school dashboard for the county, and that's really just a measure of how much is out there in the community where somebody does not know where they got it from. So that's just a measure of kind of disease in the community where it's kind of hidden disease. So, you know, if you have 10 cases and they all were at the same party and they know that they were exposed to one person, that's one thing. But if you have 10 people who have no idea where they got it from, that could actually be a measure of larger amounts of disease in the community. So those 5, some of them seem like they overlap a little bit in terms of like new cases and rising, falling cases. The good thing about having a couple of measures for this, rather than just say, why don't we just take new cases in the county and leave it at that? If you are not testing people, you won't have new cases. So if we suddenly run out of test swabs and we can't test anybody, we could still have a very high level of disease in the community and not have it reflected in that cases number. So having the testing capacity included in there and the % positive helps to kind of mitigate some of those when you just have one isolated measure, you're not really getting a nuanced picture of where things are at. The rising, falling cases is, so the daily average that's on the county dashboard is a 14-day average. So it's cases per day over the last 14 days. And then they measure this once a week and they put it on their dashboard. So we would take that 2-week average and compare it to the prior week's 2-week average. So we're actually, it's more like a rolling comparison there. So you would actually see a trend from 1 week to the next to see if you're having increasing cases in the community or decreasing cases in the community. And so if we're seeing decreasing cases and our, if we have a certain number of cases and also we see that they're increasing, that's more alarming than if we have a certain number of cases and we see that they're decreasing over time, because it gives us a little sense of where we're headed in the future. And then the % positive is really a reflection of how much disease, like, are you testing enough people to know that you're capturing the amount of disease in a community? So the ideal for that is if you can get to less than 3% positives, then you know that you're not missing out on cases that just haven't been tested. You are pretty sure that you've got a pretty good sampling of the community. And then our testing capacity, we've been well beyond that testing capacity, but this is the cutoffs for the different levels are based on kind of quality measures nationwide. It's based on a population number. And then the cutoffs for all the other measures are based on the CDC cutoffs with some little tweaks here and there. And Annika can speak to that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so any questions on this, and any want me to go back to CDC or our Iowa County data at all?
Or are there things that people feel like should be measured when we're scoring this that are not reflected?
I wonder if our capacity to run as a school based on who is out ill or who is quarantined or who, how can we function? And I don't know how that would fit into here. I don't know if that would just have to be a deciding factor that we can't, necessarily utilize this dashboard, but it's definitely a factor.
Yeah, I have actually been looking at more school report card dashboards than I ever imagined in the past month. And I do see that periodically where sometimes in very large districts where, they have, 20,000 students or, very, very large, and they have it as a percentage, like what percentage of our staff are out, what percentage of our students, and that has a, red, yellow, green I have seen smaller districts have, you know, it's more just a number, not a percentage. And it's like you have a threshold that if we hit this number of staff in one school, we, you know, we don't have the ability to stay open. I have also seen where they have it as a footer of, you know, kind of if we don't have enough staff, we just can't, you know, can't remain in this model.
It's so fluid too, because sometimes I might have 15 people out, but it's only for a day for this set and maybe 2 days for that set, but 14 days for 5 of them. You know, it's so fluid that that's what gives me pause with the entire report card is I don't care if we're, you know, at a score of 9, you know, maybe 9 or a 10, but we have, you know, I don't know, depending on what's actually happening within the walls of the school, it might not match the report card. And are we going to get pushback? You know, you're not following the report card, or, you know, I worry about that.
Yeah, I would say that any like score here really is just a, it's, you know, a suggestion or a metric space, but it doesn't override the decision-making of any administrator that would say, look, I don't have enough teachers, or, you know, we had something happen and we need to stay, we're just going to have to stay hybrid even though we met the metric for it. It's just, we can't do it right now. It would be a deferral to the admin decision making, but these would be the confines within which they would have to act. So they couldn't, you know, say we're going to go 100% in person if we haven't met that metric, even if things are looking good on the school perspective.
Yeah,
and I would say the same thing for flipping to full virtual is like, there may be a day where, you know, 10% of, all of a sudden, 10% of the kids are out sick and are all being tested, and you see like with the siblings and things like that, you're going to lose half your school. That, you know, you may make the decision to say, we're going to go 100% virtual because this is going to be, we're going to have to contact trace all these people, and there's something going on here that we need to kind of quiet down. And that could be a decision even outside of this program.
Mm-hmm. And then I'm sure you maybe already explained it, or is that every, you know, when you're comparing the last, is it the last week to the last 2 weeks, or the last week to the previous week? Is that fluid? Like, so now then, you know, it's, today is Thursday, but tomorrow's Friday. So then we kind of move into Friday to Friday to Friday instead of Thursday to Thursday to Thursday. Like, I guess I wonder at what point do you watch for trends with this chart, or do you make a decision week by week, or I guess how often do you refer to this before you make a decision?
Yeah, we had planned to use the dashboard as it is, and that's a weekly dashboard. So it's just a snapshot in time. And we would say, you know, as of this dashboard, and so they actually have all of the dashboards archived for the county. So you can go back and you can actually calculate our score out. And Annika did that with some previous weeks here. So it really, it's, I have questioned today whether we need to have more numbers for this, like if it's going to fluctuate too much from week to week, and we get rid of the less of the noise if we have more measurement. But that would get pretty complicated for pulling that data. And so one of the things we wanted to do was to make sure that this is very transparent data. This is how we got to it. It's right on the dashboard. Everybody can see exactly where we got to the numbers. And so that would just be that weekly data pull, which is on a Monday, I think, that they updated. Is that right, Annika, or is Tuesday?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And what I found fascinating in speaking with Sarah is that this can almost, you know, a model is almost a prediction, or you can see the trend happening before it happens, meaning we might see we're trending towards a lower score, which is a worse score. And we might see, you know, see something in the report card before we see it come out in the community or in the schools. So I think it is a way for us to almost monitor what we're almost foreshadowing.
Does it make sense to get a report card just for the schools? I mean, kind of drill down a little bit closer geographically, because this is county data, which includes maybe 3 districts or so. I don't know if that's possible, Jane. I mean, you said yours fluctuates a lot. I don't know if that's a lot of data, but how many have we had? How many cases do we have per day over the last 14 days? I mean, you hear about a kid here, a kid there. A lot of them don't have symptoms, so you don't really hear a lot about it. But I don't really have any idea. I mean,
Yeah, so you can drill down to census tract for cases. So when I've looked at the data for our county, it will say, Mineral Point. So it's basically like a 53565 zip code. They can't drill down too narrowly because then there's some confidentiality problems. If there's one case in a very small town, they're not going to report that there's one case. They might say less than 5 or things like that. So it's not a real accurate number week to week, but you can drill down to census tract. And actually Mineral Point has been higher than some of the other surrounding communities in our county when it comes to number of cases. So we're actually kind of a hotspot in the county.
would that be useful information to have, though, to determine, our report card to use the Mineral Point data? I mean, in addition to this, maybe?
It would be yeah, it's possible it would be helpful. It's unfortunately incredibly hard to track, so we would have to be putting a lot of time and energy into pulling that data and tracking it over time compared to the county. The other thing is there's so much overlap between communities in the county. So, there's Dodge Point athletics. And so the Dodgeville numbers might impact our point numbers just as much as the point numbers do. There's teachers who live in Dodgeville and work in Point and vice versa. So there's a lot of flow within the county. But the main barrier to that, what's that?
I mean, you have interaction with Platteville, inter-county interaction too. So, I mean, the numbers are not going to be perfect either, I guess. But what Jane was talking about with the cases fluctuating in the actual school district, it might be useful to have a report card or data or something in the district that can kind of also be used. I think that you guys are probably talking about that, I guess. But if it can be put into a report card.
Yeah, we could, just take like a snapshot of numbers out, Jane. So, because there is so much fluctuation from day to day, if we wanted to have that included somewhere in our reflection on kind of what to do for moving forward. I think there was some pushback a little bit on like absentee rates being used for this. And so I don't know whether that would be something we could do or not.
It would be so time consuming for me to look at my data every single day and determine was somebody out because it was a parent who was positive, or their parent was being cautious because a friend of theirs was positive and they spend a lot of time together, or because they were at a party and they don't really fall within the 2 days before the symptoms started, but they were 1 day before, so they're being cautious. I would spend 20 hours a day analyzing my data to put it on a dashboard that might not really help influence what we're doing. So I'm all about the science-based and using this information, but I don't know how helpful all of this exclusion for symptoms that turn out to be nothing, or symptoms that, people are being excluded for so many different reasons. There's not enough room on a dashboard.
We could potentially have like any current students or staff with active COVID infections or something like that, because that's a little bit, that's a smaller number to track, and it's a little bit easier for you. Of all the positives, so
we could do like total positives in the school, active, like you said, how many are active at the time, each time we do a weekly update to this. That would be much more doable.
Mm-hmm. And that might just be like a yes, no kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is a case act? How do you determine if a case is active? Once do they tell you, or?
It's the active case is within, I believe it's defined as 14 days, within 14 days of a positive test or onset of symptoms with a positive test. So it's the first.
So even if they have symptoms, if they continue to have symptoms at 14 days, it's still active.
They fall off of the active case for the county.
Okay, so it's, even if they still have it, it's not active.
Right, because it's not considered infectious at that point, because ongoing symptoms afterwards are not necessarily a sign of ongoing infection. It's a residual of the infection, so they're not contagious to others. Gina, I interrupted you before. I'm sorry.
No, I was just curious. So like, and maybe you've explained this, but like when you do the testing, when you talk about the dashboard and how many, like the capacity to test, do you average about the same number of tests each week? I mean,
it's pretty variable because so people get tested at different places. So like our Drive Up Center, right now we're doing an average about 72 tests a day. 3 weeks ago, we're doing 30 tests a day. So before this recent surge, we were not seeing quite as many, but people are also getting tested at the Alliant Energy Center, and some people are getting tested at, like, say, nursing homes are doing screening, or some employers might be doing screening. And then now the Iowa County just set up their testing site this week. And so our numbers of number of people tested will probably go up quite a bit. I think they did about 120 on Tuesday on their first day of testing. So that day, that number would go up quite a bit. It is averaged over 14 days when they report how many tests per day, I believe, on their dashboard. So it kind of gets rid of some of the noise, but that measure is really, we have been in green on that measure since, I would say, probably April, maybe May. So we've been testing lots and lots of, plenty of people since April or May. The real issue, if we were to go down on that number, it would be a supply issue more than anything.
okay.
Can you explain that scoring again, Monica? Your total score is 7. How did you come up with that on September?
For this example, yeah. So these numbers are right off of our Iowa County archived dashboard. So you take, let's see if I can try to put this side by side. Okay, so there's where 0.64, 1.3, 50. This is a calculation. So you take the current week divided by the prior week. So here's an example to get that number. And then 40 is the community spread here.
Okay.
And if we're adding that field that you wanted, Bob, of active positive in school district, I don't know offhand, Jane, if there was an active positive, but if we added that, it would, a yes would be here, a no would be here. So I've just followed our grid here, color coded them. So you start with a score of 5, and then if you're green, that's a +1. So 6, 7, yellow is neutral, so 0, 8, and then this is a -1, so you get 7.
Okay. Okay. Is Jan, is there typically a positive in the district every week? I mean, now there's always a positive, or is it pretty rare? I mean, I don't really know.
We just recently had our first one, and I feel like it's been a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think so. It's maybe been like, on average, maybe 1 every 2 weeks, maybe a little bit more than that.
Okay.
And so the other thing you could do is, rather than putting a point value to that, you could do like an asterisk to the star. So you could say, our score is 7, but we have an active case in the district, so there's an asterisk next to it. So kind of take it with some caution, maybe. Otherwise, it could be, I actually wonder if the no should just be neutral rather than adding a point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You could do it a bunch of different ways, or you could do like 1 case in the school district, more than 1 case. You could kind of tease it out that way, and then we would just have to rework the numbers here for what the max score would be. And so it'd be a max of 11. We couldn't start with 5 though. That's the tricky part.
Yeah, so I like the idea of having it be an asterisk, like a consideration.
Yes.
It kind
I
of feels
think
like that, along with the question of capacity and how many staff members are out. It seems like both of those data points are sort of what's really happening on the ground elements that are important, but maybe separate from the actual score.
I agree.
And I don't know if,
Could it be like a,
go ahead, Mitch.
I was gonna say, could it be like a process? So like step one is your score, and then step two is you look at those two other items where, okay, the score is telling us we can open or go to the next phase. And we have to look at capacity, things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I wasn't thinking one would be an issue. I was thinking more of catastrophic, like if 6 were the issue, but maybe something else trumps that and shuts the schools down, like Dodgeville shut down. I don't know if it's because they had one case shuts their whole thing down, or 2, or, you know, whatever, you know, consider.
Yeah, no, it wouldn't, a single case, unless they have a massive amount of exposure, a single case wouldn't shut their system down. It was multiple cases that happened kind of all at once, and
Okay.
then gets very complicated for tracing all those people.
So in a situation like that is where I would think it would add to this report card. If you had one case, maybe not a deal, but, you know, where is the case, or right on the edge case of when you shut the school down? There's a term for that, right? An outbreak or something like that. Is there a metric for that? A number?
I
You have
think
3
it's
cases.
situational. I think it depends on, you know, were the cases related? Are they siblings? Is it a teacher and their child in
Right,
the school? It's really very situational, and it depends on what person is positive and how many people, like Sarah said, that impacted, and how many also would have to be sent home as a close
Right.
contact.
For quarantine, right? Okay.
Yeah, so I wrote here kind of a combination of what Maggie and Justin said. So, you know, look at the score, look at the active cases, look at capacity, kind of as a stepwise process. That way we don't have to redo all of this scoring that we have over here. I can kind of walk you through where we're currently at. So as of this week, our score is a 3. We would also have an active case in the schools. So our numbers are trending in the opposite direction of where we want to get for more phase 2 or more in person. So, you know, on Mondays when we report to the school board, which we can share, you know, these numbers as well as the report card, kind of the process. This really does follow the Iowa County dashboard for schools, which is here. So two of these are red, and these are 2 of the significant ones. So this is emergency management status, healthcare partner status, you know, how many tests are positive. So these are kind of the concerning ones. A lot of new cases and a lot of community spread. And I know, Jane, maybe you want to speak to what the public health department has shared with you around, you know, the hybrid model is working, and we've successfully avoided, you know, shutting down, whereas around us, a number of districts are.
You want me to add to that?
Yeah, I'd love to hear what they're saying.
I mean, it's basically just exactly what you said, that, you know, I've discussed that we're working on a process of determining when we come back, either more days of the week or more students in the building at once, which if you have one, you have both. And I get the same feedback. This is not the time. It's not the time to consider it. You know, we have something that's working, so continue to improve what you have is the feedback I'm getting.
Yeah.
But again, I mean, we're here to see what else we can do if there is something else we can do. But I am giving positive feedback about how things are going from a public health standpoint and keeping our building open.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So is there anything additional? This is kind of and again, this, like, I literally put this together today very quickly, but this is just a rough, draft. Jane, you can, if you want to be the one that would put this in the bulletin or the, parent-facing newsletter, we could have it be a color-coded graph or chart, or just we're in the yellow, we're in the red. We don't want to control how you communicate it, but just this is the information I think that could inform how the school and how we are doing.
What kind of a scenario, can we look at the other table that showed the scenario of what would change to get to a 1? We're at a 3 now.
Mm-hmm.
So what the number of positive cases would increase to 5, or testing?
So if you look at so if you start at 5 and you think, okay, if you had three in the red and none in the green, that would get you to 2. So any 3 of those red, if you want to get to 1, it would be 4 of them in the red and none in the green. 0 would be all 5 in the red.
Well, based on looking at the last column from September 28th, just one change negative would bring us into virtual, right? So the percent positive, if that went to greater than 5% from 3.5%, that would go into a virtual mode. Or
so it would be
the
score for the week would be potentially in the virtual mode, but that wouldn't mean that we would flip to a virtual necessarily, because we said that it would be a 2-week kind of.
I see.
This is sensitive enough that it should be detecting worsening trends pretty early. And so if we see 2 weeks in a row that we're at 2 or 1, then I think we should be looking at, and I think the numbers to get us there would be bad enough that the county has actually considered, should we be shutting everybody down right now? Because based on their metrics, we're actually in the minimum capacity based on the number of cases in the county. So on their school dashboard, they have a red dot in the number of cases for where we should be at, and it should be minimum capacity, which is really like kids with an IEP might have in-person learning, but everybody else should be virtual. And they have made the decision that because our hybrid model has worked well, that they don't have concerns about us staying open at this point, but they could, if numbers continue to rise or they start to see trends that way, they could say everybody has to go virtual. So it could happen even outside of this metric. I think if things get to a 0 or a 1, things are bad enough in the county where we probably would be shut down even if we didn't want to.
Mm-hmm.
So did the health department have something to do with Dodgeville shutting down too, or is that strictly off their, report?
The health department works with each school when there are cases that come up and helps with contact tracing and things like that. And based on their initial assessment of how many contacts are there, what different classrooms are there, how many people are potentially exposed, what's involved here, they then make a decision to say, I think you, and they don't make the decision of whether somebody shuts down, they make a recommendation. And so they made a recommendation to Dodgeville that they shut down for 2 weeks to help with all of the situation regarding those positives. And so that's where that decision came from.
And do you know if Dodgeville's report card, aligned with what they actually did, or, these things are tested?
Theirs is a pretty simple, so theirs is, I believe the only measure that they're looking at is number of cases, right? Is that right, Annika? For the, which phase they're at. So number of cases in the county pushed them. So prior to that shutdown to virtual last week, they had phased back because the number of cases in the county had risen. So they had already phased back to less in-person, but then separate from the phases, because of active cases and need for contact tracing, they then went completely to virtual. So it's separate from their phasing. So in their phasing plan, I think I don't know where they're at this point. Erica, do you know where it would be if you were in person? Would you still be in the same phase, or?
It's all based on just like number of cases. and that's kind of, they've been pretty consistent with that from the get-go. But we would be in the same phase, right? We would still be in virtual, I believe, or we'd be just shy of it. I feel like the number is either 55 or 60 in terms of like number of cases within the county. So, and I think it was at 57. So we'd still be right where we're at.
Yeah, so I think the takeaway is that our hybrid model is working, and we're probably pretty fortunate to be maintaining face-to-face time as we are, despite what's happening in the community and county around us. And luckily, the health department supports us in that.
I think seeing the area schools shutting down like they are now, gives us more information than we had 2 weeks ago when that wasn't happening. So I was expecting it to already have happened 2 weeks ago or something. So it was kind of difficult to figure it out without enough data. But now we see what's happening, and I'm guessing the contact tracing is probably enormous for Dodgeville compared to Mineral Point, just because their kids are in school every day, I think, or almost every day. So from what Jane was saying, you have to go back 2 days. So for high school and middle school, I think you don't run into that, do you, Jane? I mean, the days are spaced out by 2 days at least, aren't they, or not? Maybe they're not.
All luck of the timing. It's all luck of when they started their symptoms, when they were diagnosed, when they were exposed. It's all luck.
Okay. I mean, I was just like, if they're 2 days a week and if
that
2
helps.
days are if one's on Tuesday and one's on Friday, they go to school, then those are spaced out beyond the 2 days that they
right.
praise.
And it's actually helpful right now. I mean, to have our elementary students who are in 2 consecutive days in a row, I've got then 5 consecutive days in a row where potentially their infectious period could have then been hopefully within those 5 days. It doesn't always work out that way, but it sure gives us a much better shot than having students in the building 4 days a week.
So if you have a child that has symptoms and you send them home and say you either quarantine for 2 weeks or you get tested, if they decide not to get tested and quarantine, that's not necessarily a case, or how do you categorize that?
Yeah, I mean, you can't call it a case, and I wouldn't do any contact tracing because I can't without a positive result. So I encourage testing when I see that they fall into the category of, that they have to be excluded for potential symptoms. But I cannot force anybody to get a test. And so we carry on, and I look for trends. I have, aside from my regular database, I have another one that's trending grade levels and classrooms so that I can keep up with, if I see trends on a grade level, then I can look closer and see, are they in the same class? And then if I look and see, well, 6 students were sent home in the last couple weeks with similar symptoms and none of them got tested, I just keep an eye out on it. It doesn't necessarily mean I can do anything. You can't go back and retest people or, force people to get a test, but at least I can keep an eye out for that and continue to encourage people to get tested.
The quarantine, the 14 days, even if they were positive, then they wouldn't be contagious when they come back. I mean, that's the idea of quarantine, whether they get tested or not, right? Let's say they don't get tested and you quarantine for 2 weeks. If they actually did have it, they wouldn't be contagious after, is it 10 days?
Right, so that's why they have that measure of you either need to have an alternate diagnosis to come back or a negative COVID test and resolution of symptoms, or 10 days after onset of symptoms. Yeah. Because then that's the usual period. If they had been positive from that, they would have filled out their quarantine.
So so you said either quarantine or get the test, or there's another one, alternate
diagnosis. So that would be like, say somebody has a chronic cough that they have all the time from acid reflux or something like that, and they go to their doctor and they have a note saying, as long as their cough is the same as their usual and no increase from their baseline, they can be in class.
All right, so how are we feeling about this report card and how it looks? Is everyone, do we want to vote? This looks good? Yes? Okay, so raise your hand if you're good. Okay, majority good. Okay, so we will report on this report card on Monday. I'm not saying we won't, you know, this isn't like a final version, but I think this is a great start. We'll see what the school board has questions.
Could we just look at a scenario for phase 2? Jane was concerned about, you know, if you went to phase 2 too quick, but if you look on August 31st, we're at 5. Or no, September 14th, I guess we're on a 7, just weird that close. But so we would have been phase 2 on September 14th, right?
No,
Or no, it has to be 2 weeks continuous. Okay, so close to it then. So we would have been close to phase 2. Okay. So that kind
But again, that would have been 2 weeks with a potential pivot at the quarter, and we would have since gone downhill. So
right. So are you saying that? So it had to be 2 continuous weeks and a quarter change, or I don't know if other teachers are on here. I only see 4 people on my screen, but is a quarter change would it be difficult to shift before that? I think Dodgeville shifts back and forth all the time, but you know, since last time we spoke, I think it was going to be kind of difficult to switch.
So last meeting we spoke about, I think it was Jody who had that suggestion around shifting at the quarters and make the decision 2 weeks before the next quarter. And
it was for this quarter, right?
Right, and we presented that to the school board, and they were, you know, they were open to that.
Yeah, I thought we were specifically talking about this quarter. That's not going to happen. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen with this data, but you know, 4th quarter, 3rd quarter, that's gone away. I guess things can change too, I guess, once we see how this. So. Yep.
All right, so that is the report card. So if we don't have any additional questions on that, it is about 6:50. We do have the draft phase 2 that Matt Renwick has shared with me that I can bring up on my screen. But again, you know, I can share that, but keep in mind that we are now moving in the opposite direction from phase 2. So I don't think this is actually feasible at quarter. So I'm not sure if we want to spend the time looking at that, knowing that that will likely change again in some way.
Phase 2 will look different if it switches into at 3rd quarter versus 4th quarter versus 2nd quarter. Is that what you're saying?
Potentially. I mean, we don't know what enrollment will look like, what families decide to do. If, you know, there's a lot that could change over the winter.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what his rough draft is or idea. You know, if you can show us that.
When we're looking at the report card, just before we completely go beyond it, I just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that I heard everything correctly, because I think people are going to look at this and they're going to look at that graph and they're going to see the trend and they're like, oh, we're going to be switching over to this. So when you present it to the school board and everybody else, you got to be crystal clear that just because we were at phase 2 doesn't mean we were going to switch then. And we could show a 2 that shows us in the virtual, and the way we have it structured that we're very confident that we can stay in the hybrid model, and that parents are like, oh my God, next week we're virtual, where we might be at 2 for weeks even and still able to maintain the hybrid situation. You know, I don't know how you present that way, but it's got to be pretty crystal clear, because that's the biggest issue with it, with having a report card that parents are going to see, is it, we can't change up and down, just like Jane said. And in addition to that, let's say we are fortunate enough sometime to move into a phase 2. If we end up having some sort of outbreak or something like that, and we have to go to virtual, is the assumption that we come back to hybrid model, or do we come back to the phase 2 that we just left before the situation that we had, you know? Maybe that's not our decision, and that's really left with Mr. Wainwright and Mr. Austin anyway, but just if that was something anybody wanted to weigh in on.
I'll
Yeah,
weigh in on the like how to communicate it to community. I guess so. I wonder if we shouldn't even have the actual score on it, and really just have like a stoplight dashboard that people can look at of like red, yellow, green, and not necessarily have it be shared what our actual calculation is, because that gets pretty wonky and complicated anyways. And so, you know, maybe people just need to have that red, yellow, green thing to look at. And then on the back end for admin and for us as a committee and for the school board, we could actually break it down so that we could say, okay, if we put a score to this, this is where we would be at. Because I think it is hard to make a decision based on a dashboard of red, yellow, green stoplights, but it's fairly easy to get a kind of snapshot of where are we at by looking at that. I think it would just be really hard to kind of make a decision as a school board based on, well, this one's green, but this one's red, but this one's yellow. What do we do with that? So this really just kind of puts some like concrete numbers to it.
I mean, like Kyle was saying, I don't think the administration has to go 100% by this, but I think it's a good indicator for them because there are a lot of numbers. So by just having these numbers, they can go by it, but I don't think that means if we are in virtual mode, like Kyle said, administration might decide, well, we can still do hybrid, or maybe we're in hybrid and they say we need to go to virtual. So there's still, obviously they still have the ability to do whatever they want, but it's just another tool that they can use.
So do you think what you're saying, I think, is on the back end, you know, that we will see the virtual, the hybrid, the phase 2 and whatnot, but the parents and stuff will just see red, yellow. Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Yep. We'll keep it easy.
And in terms of the hybrid, coming back to phase 1 hybrid versus phase 2 hybrid, if we go to a virtual pause, my sense would be that we'd probably want to come back to phase 1 hybrid, but I think it really depends on the situation. Why did it go all virtual, and how long were we in that phase, and what are the numbers looking like, and things like that. So I don't know that you know, you can necessarily predict how the surges will go and what would flip us to virtual and things like that. So I think it would probably be it could go either way. I don't think our model would necessarily lay out that you have to go from virtual to phase 1 to phase 2. I think it would be more kind of looking at the sense of the data and what's going on at that point.
It would be nice to have more data. I mean, the drill down, people that like data might want to actually see how those red, green, all those things just show up. I know you want to dumb it down for most people, but some people do like to dig like how you came up with that. So, I mean, when you send it out to all the parents or on the website, whatever, you don't have it, but somewhere on the website would be nice to kind of explain how you're coming up with the numbers. Does that make sense or not? It seems fairly simple when Annika explained it anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can work with Jane or whomever puts together, you know, this is just a graphic I put together. These are where the data points are coming from off of our own Iowa County, you know, department data dashboard.
And we could put the thresholds, you know, just like they have it on there. To go back to what Iowa County has for their dashboard. So this report card, we could have, you know, the ranges of the green is this, yellow is this, red's this, and then just have the dot at the end with the number in it. And then, but all the back end of calculating of like what level are we at based on the points and things like that, that could be more of an internal number.
Okay, does that answer all of those questions? Yep, okay. So I will bring up phase 2. And this is for the elementary school. So current status is the hybrid model, 2 days in person, 2 days virtual, which are synchronous, and then 1 day of asynchronous learning, 4 sections to reduce the number of students in each room. Jane's probably the expert of all of these numbers, but this gives the breakdown. The white up above is virtual, and then this number down below is in person. And so then phase 2, let me see if I can zoom in for all of you a little bit. So primarily in-person instruction with the virtual option, 4 days in person, 1 day of independent learning, or 4 days virtual and 1 day of independent learning. It would only be 3 sections for in-person instruction and 1 section for virtual. And then the breakdown of numbers. So you can see it's 244 with 57 virtual, and then 135. So you're adding, you know, a significant number more into the school. Increases student body and building by 81%. So the strengths of phase 2, so physical and health, well-being, increase in supervised outdoor play and learning. Academic, more in-person instruction is more effective for young learners versus virtual. Social emotional learning, more time in school offers more opportunities to connect with peers and maintain friendships. The challenges of phase 2, so there's more risk with rising cases in the county and state. You cannot social distance in some classrooms, lunch, hallways, bathrooms, so increased risk of infection. Academic learning, the routines and schedules have been developed within hybrid, so teachers are reporting a better experience. Equity issues with who comes to school or who does not. And then if we go to 3 sections, some students will be reassigned to a new teacher. So that will disrupt relationships and community. The implications. So the hybrid model is effective. Other schools that started in a phase 2 like plan are closing for 2 weeks at a time and potentially exposing higher numbers of students, families, and community members. Academically, virtual and asynchronous learning may not be as effective as in person, but learning is occurring. Teachers are becoming more creative with their instruction in different modalities. And then for social emotional, it's not safe enough to try right now. We should appreciate having 2 days of in-person instruction now. Relationships and community can be developed and sustained online. So the recommendation here is move to phase 2 when it is safe enough to try. And then this is just the statement from our Iowa County Health Public Health Officer, Debbie, who said, we're grateful for the hybrid model that Mineral Point has worked so hard to implement, and it has most definitely translated into less disease transmission in the county. They welcome us to continue the hybrid model and not concede on its format and structure. And Jane, if you want to add anything, I know you've definitely been helping through the phase 2 discussions, and we had a great dialogue around, you know, what is safe and can it be done safely? And I think we really determined, along with Dr. Fox, did a tour and walked through and, you know, looked at the classrooms and did calculations. And it really appears that phase 2, despite what's happening in our county, but it just may not be feasible with the kind of numbers that we're experiencing right now.
Sorry, I've got a kiddo next to me, but you said it very well. I have nothing to add.
Okay. Does anyone have questions? And again, I don't know that this is something that would be indicated right now. I don't think we could recommend, I couldn't stand behind this and say I recommend phase 2 at the quarter because of what is happening in our county. You know, I would love to have the kids in face-to-face more. I think we all would, but we also want it to be done safely. And the state, you know, our state, luckily our county is doing fairly well, but our state is in a really bad position. So if you don't know that, I'm letting you know, we're in a really bad position in our state. So, you know, we can only hope that our state improves and somehow it gets better, but we're just not going in the right direction right now.
Yeah, I think most people probably agree that now is not the time. I mean, Wisconsin's been, it's getting worse, but even in the county is getting worse too. So, but the plan looks good when it is time to implement it. Obviously, second quarter is not going to happen. I mean, even just from the thing that you just had here, the guide shows that it wouldn't work. But when it is time, I think that's a good plan that he has. So.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that when I did the classroom tours, there was really very, very little capacity in most of the classrooms in the elementary school to add more students without sacrificing social distancing. So we would, if we were to move into that, we talked about some strategies for, okay, do you cluster a couple of desks together so that most of the class can be social distanced, and these kids that maybe they're cousins and they're seeing each other outside of school anyways, or things like that. If you were going to sacrifice social distancing, is there a way that it can be less risky for, the vast majority of kids? We talked about how we can spread out into some new classroom spaces, like in the library, in order to space people out a little bit. But then we also talked about how difficult it's going to be to do lunch for this many more kids, and what it would probably mean is that some of the kids are going to have lunch in their classroom. Teachers were pretty wary about that because that's, some of their only time at this point to have a break where they can, eat something and go to the bathroom and that sort of thing. And so, there's other things that come up, and busing was another thing that we talked about, that we're not sure how the busing will work if we have more people in person, if we will have to, again, not distance as well as we have been, or run additional routes, or, stagger the bus routes or things like that. So this on paper looks very clear. It's just kind of divided by classroom and things like that, but the logistics behind it are pretty complex. And so I think it's going to take a whole lot more planning and thought and things like that before we would even be ready to it's probably good that we're not there yet for our numbers, so that it gives the school a little bit of time to kind of come up with a logistical plan for some of those extra things.
I think a big difficulty that you touched on was busing. I mean, it's something that I wasn't thinking about before, but somebody mentioned it me last week, and it's even if they're not in the same class and they're on a bus, I mean, I don't know how is it still the 6-foot distancing, or it depends on the grades, or depends on how long they're on the bus? Or do you just assume if somebody had it on that bus, would everybody be quarantined then? Or, and I don't, maybe you haven't crossed that, path yet, but if you have kids in there 4 days a week, it becomes even more difficult. I would imagine the tracing would be real difficult to figure that out, but. So
yeah, I don't think we've had to cross that bridge yet, right, Jane? We haven't had to worry about that yet.
We haven't, but I've thought about it a lot. I don't want to say for sure without having a specific, real life situational discussion with Iowa County, but there is no way for us to know who all touched a high five on the bus, or sat next to somebody and then they said, you can't sit together, so then they moved, but they touched, or the windows are all closed and it's an enclosed space, and how long was each student on that bus with other students? And the guidance I've gotten so far from the health department is that whenever somebody's in a car together I don't know when you're in the car less than 2 minutes. I mean, if you're in the car together for more than 2 minutes, you're going to be a close contact, especially if the windows are all closed. So to me, a bus full of kids are all close contacts, unless I am instructed otherwise.
In that case, that's even more concerning than the class sizes, how many you have in a class, and this whole plan to me kind of doesn't go out the window, but that's insignificant compared to the exposure potential of the bus. I mean, if you're going by, if you're not going by the CDC guidelines, you're stepping it up to a level where if you're enclosed, that's it, you're out. Then I mean, the potential for, a great number of kids being quarantined for 2 weeks and, potentially families, siblings, whatever is a lot greater than by having kids going 4 days a week versus 2. But
Mitch, how are the bus capacity right now? It's running at a pretty reduced capacity, right?
It is. When I talk to Todd, it kind of depends on the day of the week, but sometimes a bus may have a dozen, sometimes it may be 6 kids on the bus. If we simply put 1 student per seat, you're looking at, I think the number was 25 students that could be on a bus. And when you're a really big, tall guy like I am, you can't see over the back of the seat in front of you. So a lot of these guys are a little bit shorter than I am even. So, I mean, we know it's not 6 feet. We know it's not perfectly safe, but masks are required and there is a little bit of a barrier in there. So it would be, right now, working with Todd, it's no more than 25 on a bus.
Okay, great. Mr. Wainwright, can you also comment on for Monday night? I know that they want the report card. Is there anything additional that the school board would like from the committee for Monday?
I think if you have a recommendation as a committee, as you make this presentation and say, as you're looking at the numbers or as you're looking at the report card score, you give your recommendation to the board. It'll be their ultimate decision, but I certainly think they're going to want to hear kind of what your recommendation is moving forward and that you'll continue to look at the data. Phase 2 plans are on there for an action item. And I think to like what Bob had said earlier, it looks like a very thought out plan as it's put together. And I know Mr. Austin has a plan, a phase 2 plan for middle school, high school students as well. It's like in my world, I would hope that they would say, yeah, we approve these plans so that when the numbers indicate it's time to go, this is what we would like to see and we support this moving forward. Not that they would say, we like it and that's what we're doing at the start of the second quarter. So again, that'll be their decision to make, but I know that they would like to see what a phase 2 plan would look like.
Okay. So as a committee, should we vote as to, I think we agree with this report card, but I guess our recommendation based on these numbers would be to maintain our current hybrid. That would be what our numbers indicate. So is everyone comfortable with that? Do you want discussion or should we just vote that, yes, we agree, that's our recommendation to maintain our current, Mr. Austin?
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
It's the first time I've done this with the headphone things. Does anybody have any questions about the high school potential plans, or high school, middle school? Just so if there's questions, I can answer them. But I know I shared a little bit last time I shared with the board. We're coming up with a couple different versions of what it might look like. But is there any major questions of what the high school, middle school phase 2 possibly would look like?
Marcia has the question.
I'm very unfamiliar with the schools.
Sure.
Do the students all come in one door and out another door? Do they have to walk on right side or left side of the hallway?
Yep.
Do you have an upstairs and a downstairs if you have stairs? So to discourage.
Yes. So
Okay.
Sorry, you cut out there.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Yes. So high school kids enter the main door. All the high school kids come in through the main office doors. The middle school kids come in through door number 3, which is the middle school entrance closest to the road. So we try to separate because high school is on the upper level, middle school is on the lower level. There are classes that have to come up, but we try to minimize the amount of contact between grade levels, obviously that way. But they have to come up for Phi Ed and music and things like that. So They do come up and down the levels, but majority of the middle school students stay downstairs most of the day in the middle school, and then high school students stay upstairs in the high school for the most part.
Would it be unreasonable to ask parents to drive their kids to school and not have buses?
Mr. Rayner, I'll let you take that one.
You can certainly
encourage.
You can encourage that, but we have requirements to provide transportation for anybody that needs it, when they're a certain distance away from the school building. So even, students that are in town, if they're far enough away from the school, get picked up by a bus. It might not be door to door in town. It might be central pickup drop-off points. But there are requirements for us. And I guess I forgot my resident experts online. He is a bus rider. Matthew, can you tell us on your bus route, how many students are on your particular route?
Not a ton. So I guess on my day that I'm in person, the majority of the kids that normally ride my bus are on, which still is not a lot of our bus. There's probably only, 10, I'd say 8 to 12 seats filled. There's not a lot of kids on the bus even on a normal day, and especially with everyone split up. But I'd say for the most part, my bus does have pretty good social distancing. There's a big gap in the middle of where a lot of the students sit. So I'd say at least on my bus, things have been going well, but there's not a lot of kids to worry about. So I don't know what things look like on other buses though.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's a good point that they're not filled. It sounds, when I think of a school bus, I think of kids hanging out the windows, and I picture this bus full of people. But if it's only impacting less than a dozen students, and that's only if we have the chance that someone who rides a bus is the positive case. I mean, it's a lot of what ifs. So if it's not that big of an impact, it doesn't sound like it's much more than a classroom size.
Okay, thank you.
And I would say now, obviously if you look at that phase 2 plan and it's more students 4 days a week, obviously there's going to be more students on a bus. Some of the ridership depends on, especially at this level, is it a freshman or sophomore day where there might be some more students running a bus versus a junior senior day where most of those guys are driving their own cars to school. So that impacts bus ridership a little bit as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So is everyone ready to vote about our recommendation that we will present to the school board? Our numbers indicate 3, current hybrid. Please raise your hand if you are in support of that recommendation of maintaining our current hybrid. Okay. Okay, looks like everyone, majority. Is there anything else? Justin, am I missing anything?
No, I think we covered it all. I mean, obviously, if the data was looking better, I think we could get more into the logistical issues of phase 2, but I think we've done as much as we can right now, and we'll continue to watch the data, and if it starts to trend in the more positive way, we can start to dig into those details.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so our recommendation will be to maintain our current hybrid. This is the report card that can guide the school board administration. It's not, it's not like the end all be all. We're not saying you have to do what this says. Again, need score in the higher level for 2 weeks before a pivot at quarter. So I guess that is, part of the report card. So look at score, look at active cases, look at capacity. I can somewhat clean some of this up so it is, to Mr. Carey's point, more digestible or understandable by parents, and then also dig into the data with the school board. Anything I'm missing, and I'll probably put this on some slides for ease of presentation for this meeting.
Will you maintain that Will you be the one maintaining this?
Would you like me to? I can, and then get it to you every week. Yeah.
That would be awesome.
Sure.
Annika, do you want to just on that scoring card, we have that note at the bottom of like, okay, things go really great for a long time. At what point can we get rid of some of the like precautions and things like that? And of course, this is like a hypothetical future date. Who knows when that's going to come? And there have been some places that have suggested that if you have no new cases in your county for 14 days, then you can essentially get back to your normal lives in terms of distancing and things like that. But I think until we get to a very great, really good level like that, then we would continue with our risk mitigation that we are doing to the best of our ability within those models. So the masking, if we can be consistent with that, even as we move forward, that's going to be a really good risk mitigation. Social distancing as much as we can, continuing all the hand hygiene, and then the cleaning, just regardless of where our numbers are. But we'll be able to implement them to different degrees depending on what phase we're in.
Yeah, that looks great. Okay. Well, I'm sorry I didn't keep it under an hour, but an hour, 20 minutes, I'm pretty excited about that. So thank you, everybody. And I think we can conclude the meeting or adjourn.
Annika, when you get the slides together, if you just want to email them to me, then I will pull them up for the board meeting on Monday night and can kind of walk through them as you're looking at that.
Great. And Jane, I might work with you to make something look a little prettier because I know you've put together some communication, so I'll try to work with you to model it after that.
Sounds great. Thanks for all the work, Dr. Fox and Annika.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
Yes, thank you very much. That's a lot of time you guys keep putting in.
Yeah, really incredible.
We said
Thank
it was
you.
really good that we were not doing our mental math gymnastics in front of an entire Zoom meeting like we were last night, because it was a little bit like, I'm sure it would have been mind numbing for everybody watching. So I'm glad we kind of figured it out before the meeting tonight.
Yeah. Yes. So now you've all done Epidemiology 101. So congratulations. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.